In 2009, the EPA released an alarming report acknowledging for the first time the repercussions of climate change. In this report, entitled Endangerment and Cause or Contribute Findings for Greenhouse Gases under the Clean Air Act, the Environmental Protection Agency called for immediate policy changes that would address the imminent crisis caused by greenhouse gas emissions. The report acknowledged the disastrous impacts on human health, air quality, water quality, agriculture, energy, and infrastructure, as well as other effects that would result from climate change, and advised immediate action. Congress responded in the same year with the Waxman-Markey Bill, otherwise known as the American Clean Energy and Security Act, or ACES. The House of Representatives passed a version of it, which would have established a national system of cap and trade. However, the bill did not garner enough support in the Senate, and thus did not become law. According to SourceWatch.org, if the cap and trade program detailed in ACES had been enacted, it would have created clean energy jobs, saved consumer energy costs, increased America's energy independence, and decreased global warming pollution. This cap and trade program has the potential to reduce global warming gases by 83% by the year 2050 and compensate energy-intensive industries for costs incurred under the bill. We, the advocates, resolve that Congress should enact the cap and trade policy as outlined in the American Clean Energy and Security Act of 2009 in order to establish a U.S. carbon market. We are specifically promoting the adoption of the National Trade Program and Policy outlined in ACES. Cap and trade is a multidimensional environmental and economic policy. According to historian Richard Conniff of the Smithsonian, the origins of emissions trading can be traced to the Reagan administration. Cap and trade is the result of an unlikely union between growing environmental concerns and the expansion of free market principles. Rather than implementing command and control approaches supported by environmentalists, which place the enormous cost of cleanup solely on polluters, economists suggested a solution that would not send energy companies responsible for pollution back to the dark ages. Rather than penalizing polluters, the government under cap and trade would provide incentives for companies to pollute less and to regulate themselves, gradually decreasing that pollution and allowing the free market to produce a cleaner environment. Richard Conniff of Smithsonian explains that under cap and trade, the government doesn't tell polluters how to clean up, it only caps emissions. Companies are given a certain number of credits based on their cap, in this case, tons of pollutants allowed, which is called their right to pollute. Energy producers, such as power plants, may have a higher annual right because they provide a public utility. They can restrict their output, switch to cleaner fuels, or use other technologies to limit emissions. If they have credits remaining, they are rewarded with profits when they sell their polluting rights to another company that needs to buy their credits. Each year, caps become more stringent, in keeping with federal emissions standards, making the credits on the market more valuable over time as they become increasingly scarce. The U.S. needs to establish a cap and trade system in order to address climate change resulting from greenhouse gas emissions. Cap and trade has the potential to lower carbon emissions to scientifically acceptable levels, which is 80% of current levels, in 50 years. According to the Center for American Progress Action think tank, the U.S. produces about 1/5 of global carbon dioxide pollution, and U.S. emissions have grown by more than 1% per year since 1990. Emissions will grow by an additional 20% to 52% by the year 2025 without action taken. Coal-fired power plants and motor vehicles are responsible for half of the U.S.'s global warming pollution. Under ACES, emissions will be reduced from power plants and other sources. ACES requires greenhouse gas emissions to be 17% lower than 2005 levels by 2020. The provisions of this bill would reduce greenhouse gas pollution by setting a cap on greenhouse gas emissions and requiring all emitters over 25,000 tons to have an allowance for each ton of pollution. Companies could buy or sell allowances to meet their needs. If the U.S. does fail to cap greenhouse gas emissions, our country will be helpless to avoid the disastrous environmental and economic impacts forecasted in the 2009 EPA climate change report. Today, climate change has still not been addressed nationally, and without intervention, greenhouse gas levels will inevitably continue to rise. The cost of implementing cap and trade would be far less than the cost of environmental destruction, which would occur without action. The EPA has officially declared greenhouse gas as a danger to human health. The U.S. is a major contributor to global carbon levels, and the nations most likely to suffer in the future are relatively undeveloped poor nations that rely heavily on industries like tourism and agriculture. Due to the global nature of the problem of climate change, the U.S. does have a responsibility to address it through legislation. According to the EPA, climate change impacts in many parts of the world will also worsen problems that raise humanitarian and national security issues for the U.S. Cap and trade will establish effective economy-wide incentives for clean energy and energy efficiency. Because because cap and trade has already been proven to work in reducing emissions. In surrendering regulatory power to the marketplace, lawmakers under President Bush Sr. were able to successfully confront the issue of acid rain using sulfur dioxide emissions trading in the Clean Air Act of 1990. By 1995, nationwide acid rain emissions had fallen by 3 million tons, well ahead of schedule required by law. In Smithsonian, there's a report that states that 20 years into its signing, the Clean Air Act has utilized cap and trade to cut acid rain emissions in half 1990 levels, and cost utility companies only $3 billion a year compared to the estimated $25 billion predicted initially by business naysayers. An estimated $122 billion in benefits to the environment and to human health from avoided illness and healthier lakes and forests has come as a result of this bill. The same principle can be used to address carbon dioxide and global warming. Harnessing environmental goals to market forces has worked before. Tradable pollution permits were issued and private capital continued to flow while lowering overall pollution levels. Companies are allowed to use whatever means, normally the least expensive, to meet their minimum requirements. Creating a new carbon market will generate profits and stimulate innovation. Tony Johnson of the Council of Foreign Relations cites the example of the European Union, which currently relies on cap and trade to reduce their carbon emissions from industrial plants. ICE Futures Europe is a provision of the Kyoto Protocol and is the largest system of its kind in the world today. Europe it began in 2005 and covers carbon dioxide emissions. In 2008, the New York Times reported that over a 3-year period, adjustments in emission giveaways had decreased and pollution levels had dropped nearly 3%. In economic terms, journalist David Roberts of Grist.org explains that carbon markets just make sense. He points out that carbon pollution is the classic example of an externality, a cost that polluters are currently passing on to the public in the form of pollution. Cap and trade would force polluters to pay for that externality by incorporating a market price of energy-intensive goods and services. For those who argue against cap and trade, claiming that it is expensive, Roberts shows that shifting the cost of production from the consumer to the producer will not raise net costs, only place more burden on the producer. The Department of Energy's National Renewable Energy Laboratory CAP has also identified another economic benefit of cap and trade, the potential to create jobs and stimulate green technologies. Cap and trade will spur innovation and provide a means for industries to invest in more sustainable practices. Fixing broken energy markets in the U.S. through the creation of a carbon market will improve future economic and environmental outcomes for the United States and other nations. If implemented, it would create clean energy jobs, save consumer energy costs, increase America's energy independence, and decrease global warming pollution. Thank you.